I was never meant to be just the little HR lady, but that's exactly what they called me, the one who scheduled meetings, processed paperwork, and nodded politely when the executives made their jokes. They thought I was disposable, replaceable, forgettable. Until they fired me and discovered I was the only person alive who held the access codes to their $200 million payroll system. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just clicked one button, and the entire company stopped breathing. My name is Talia Monroe, and I'm 33 years old. Before I became the woman who brought down Epsilon Works with a single keystroke, I was the founder of something much smaller but infinitely more passionate. It started in a cramped studio apartment in Minneapolis, where I lived on frozen sandwiches and Mountain Dew while coding the back end of what would become the first intelligent HR management system for small startups. The idea came to me during my previous job at a mid-sized logistics company, watching our HR department struggle with spreadsheets that crashed every time someone tried to calculate benefits for more than 50 employees. I was working as a junior systems analyst then, but I spent my lunch breaks in the HR department fascinated by how much human data we generated and how poorly we managed it. Employee schedules, performance reviews, salary adjustments, vacation requests. It was all chaos disguised as organization. I believe that human data deserved the same sophisticated treatment as financial data. Every person in a company was an investment, a set of variables that could be optimized, predicted, and protected. So I started building HR Flow in my apartment, working 18-hour days and sleeping on a mattress I'd pushed against the wall to make room for my 3-monitor setup. The system I created wasn't just about storing employee information, it was predictive. It could analyze patterns in employee satisfaction surveys and predict who was likely to quit 3 months before they even started looking for new jobs. It tracked productivity metrics across departments and suggested optimal team compositions. Most importantly, it integrated every aspect of human resources from hiring to payroll to exit interviews into one seamless, automated platform. I launched HR Flow with exactly 4 clients, all startups founded by friends from college. Within 6 months, word had spread through the Minneapolis tech community. Within a year, I had 37 clients across the Midwest. The system was generating real results. Employee retention rates improved by an average of 43%, and companies were saving an average of 15 hours per week on administrative tasks. But I was burning out. Running a one-person company while maintaining and improving a complex software platform was slowly killing me. I was losing weight, forgetting to eat, and I'd developed a nervous twitch in my left eye from staring at code for 14 hours straight. I needed help, but I couldn't afford to hire anyone good enough to touch my system. That's when Epsilon Works came calling. They weren't a tech giant, more like a mid-tier consulting firm that specialized in digital transformation solutions for traditional businesses. Their CEO, Marcus Brennan, was the kind of man who wore expensive suits to hide the fact that he'd never built anything in his life. He'd made his fortune buying small companies, rebranding them, and selling them to larger corporations for 3 times what he'd paid. Marcus flew to Minneapolis to meet me personally, which should have been my first warning sign. Men like him didn't fly commercial to anywhere unless they smelled serious money. He took me to dinner at the fanciest restaurant in the city, a place where the waiters described each dish like they were reading poetry and the wine cost more than my monthly rent. "Talia," he said, cutting into a piece of Wagyu beef that probably cost more than most people's car payments. "You've built something remarkable, but you're thinking too small." I should have walked away then. I should have finished my overpriced salmon, thanked him for dinner, and gone home to my cramped apartment and my beautiful, predictable code. Instead, I listened. Marcus painted a picture of HR Flow deployed across hundreds of companies, thousands of employees, millions of data points flowing through my algorithms. He talked about enterprise contracts worth more money than I'd ever imagined. He described a future where my system would become the backbone of human resources management across entire industries. The catch, he explained, was that I needed their infrastructure, their sales team, their enterprise connections. I needed Epsilon Works to take HR Flow from a promising startup to a market-dominating platform. "What I'm proposing," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of a man who'd done this dance 100 times before. Is a merger, not an acquisition, a partnership. The offer was unusual, even by startup standards. Instead of buying HR Flow outright, Epsilon Works wanted to acquire it for exactly $1. In exchange, I would receive equity in the combined company and retain creative control over the technical development of the platform. I would become their director of strategic human resources, with a salary that was 5 times what I'd ever made and benefits that included everything from health insurance to a company car. But there was one clause in the contract that my lawyer flagged as unusual. Section 22B stated that if I were terminated without specific cause within the first 3 years of the merger, I would have the right to repurchase the core HR engine, all the algorithms, databases, and system architecture I'd created for the original purchase price of $1, provided I exercise this option within 30 days of termination. It's a standard retention clause, Marcus assured me when I asked about it. Just legal boilerplate to protect your intellectual property investment. We have no intention of letting you go. Talia, you're the genius behind the system. I was 29 years old, exhausted, and dazzled by the possibility of seeing my creation reach its full potential. I signed the contract. The first year wasn't terrible. Epsilon Works moved me to their headquarters in Chicago, set me up in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, and gave me a team of 12 developers to help scale the platform. We landed our first major enterprise client, a manufacturing company with over 3,000 employees, within 4 months. But gradually, I began to notice changes, small ones at first. Marcus started referring to HR Flow as our proprietary HR solution in client meetings, rarely mentioning that I'd created it. New features were being developed without my input, usually involving flashy user interface updates that looked impressive in sales demos but didn't actually improve the system's functionality. The breaking point came during my second year, when Marcus announced a company-wide initiative called Brand Synergy Integration. This involved rebranding HR Flow as Epsilon HR Pro and implementing what he called culture optimization protocols. These protocols were everything I'd fought against when building the original system. Instead of using data to genuinely improve employee experiences, they focused on surveillance and control. The system began tracking how long employees spent on bathroom breaks, monitoring their email response times, and flagging workers whose productivity metrics fell below arbitrary benchmarks. Worse, Marcus hired a new chief people officer, a woman named Rebecca Sterling, who'd made her career implementing cost-cutting measures disguised as employee wellness programs. Rebecca introduced initiatives like Email-Free Fridays, which just meant employees had to work weekends to catch up on correspondence, and emotional transparency uniforms, color-coded shirts that indicated workers' moods, ostensibly to promote workplace empathy, but actually to help managers identify potentially problematic employees. I tried to push back, but my objections were dismissed as resistance to organizational growth. My team was gradually reassigned to other projects. My office was moved to a smaller space on a lower floor. Meeting invitations that used to include me automatically began arriving without my name on them. The final insult came when Rebecca announced the implementation of predictive wellness monitoring, a feature that would use my algorithms to identify employees who were likely to file workers' compensation claims or take extended sick leave. The system would then recommend proactive interventions, which included everything from mandatory fitness programs to psychological evaluations. I'd created HR Flow to empower employees and help companies build better workplaces. Epsilon Works was turning it into a weapon. 3 months into my third year, I received a text message from Jake Morrison, one of the few remaining friends I had at the company. Jake worked in IT security, and we'd maintained a quiet friendship built on shared frustration with management's increasingly authoritarian approach to employee monitoring. The message was brief: coffee tomorrow, need to talk. We met at a small cafe 6 blocks from the office, far enough away that we wouldn't encounter any colleagues. Jake looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from working for people you've lost all respect for. I wasn't supposed to see this, he said, sliding a folded piece of paper across the table. But I thought you should know. It was a printout of an internal email from Marcus to Rebecca, dated 2 days earlier. The subject line read, Q1 Restructuring, HR Leadership Transition. The email was brief, but devastating. Marcus was planning to streamline the HR department by eliminating redundant positions and transitioning to a more traditional management structure. My name was specifically mentioned as someone whose role had evolved beyond the current organizational needs. They were going to fire me. I read the email 3 times before the full implications sank in. After building the system that now generated over 60% of Epsilon Works' revenue, after watching them bastardize my creation into something I barely recognized, they were planning to discard me like an outdated piece of equipment. But they'd made one crucial mistake. In their rush to push me aside, they'd forgotten about Section 22B. I went home that night and read through my original contract for the first time in over 2 years. The clause was still there, exactly as I remembered it. If terminated without specific cause, I had the right to repurchase the core HR engine for $1 within 30 days. Marcus and his team had spent 3 years building Epsilon HR Pro on top of my original algorithms. But they'd never bothered to truly understand how the system worked. They'd added features and interfaces, but the core engine, the predictive algorithms, the data integration protocols, the automated processing systems was still mine. And according to the contract I'd signed, it could be mine again. I sent a text message to David Chen, the lawyer who'd helped me negotiate the original merger, prepare the paperwork. They're about to do something very stupid. The termination meeting was scheduled for 4:30 p.m. on a Friday. A classic corporate move designed to minimize disruption and prevent fired employees from causing scenes in front of their colleagues. I received the meeting invitation at 2:15 p.m. with no agenda and no explanation, just a calendar entry titled Discussion Conference Room B. I'd been expecting this for 3 days, so I was ready. I'd already backed up all my personal files, cleared my browser history, and sent myself copies of every document I might need. I'd also done something else, something that Marcus and Rebecca would have been horrified to discover if they'd been paying attention. I'd spent the previous week conducting a comprehensive audit of the Epsilon HR Pro system, documenting every piece of code, every algorithm, and every data structure that originated from my original HR Flow platform. What I discovered was both satisfying and terrifying. Epsilon Works had built their entire human resources operation on top of my system. Without the core engine I'd created, their platform was nothing more than a collection of pretty interfaces with no actual functionality. Conference Room B was a sterile space with white walls, a long glass table, and no windows. Marcus was already there when I arrived, along with Rebecca and a woman I didn't recognize who was probably from their legal department. They'd arranged themselves on one side of the table like a tribunal, leaving a single chair for me on the opposite side. Talia, Marcus began, his voice carrying the false warmth he used when delivering bad news. Thank you for joining us. Please, have a seat. I sat down and waited. I'd learned over the years that in situations like this, silence was a powerful weapon. Let them fill the awkward space with their prepared speeches and justifications. Let them reveal how much they'd rehearsed this moment. As you know, Rebecca said, opening a folder and removing a document I recognized as a termination agreement. Epsilon Works is always evolving to meet the changing needs of our clients and our industry. Sometimes that evolution requires us to make difficult decisions about organizational structure. She was reading from a script, probably written by their legal team to minimize the company's liability. I nodded politely and continued to wait. After careful consideration, Marcus continued. We've decided to restructure the HR department to better align with our current strategic initiatives. This means that your position as Director of Strategic Human Resources is being eliminated, effective immediately. There it was. No specific cause, no performance issues, no misconduct allegations. Just a vague restructuring that happened to eliminate exactly one position mine. The legal woman slid the termination agreement across the table. It was a standard document offering 2 weeks of severance pay in exchange for signing a non-compete clause and agreeing not to disparage the company. Attached to it was a separate paper requiring me to immediately surrender all company property, including my laptop, security badge, and parking pass. "We understand this is difficult," Rebecca said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "But we're confident this transition will benefit everyone involved. You're incredibly talented, Talia, and I'm sure you'll find exciting opportunities elsewhere." I picked up the pen they'd placed next to the documents. For a moment, I let them think I was going to sign. Then I set the pen down and looked directly at Marcus. "I'll need some time to review this with my attorney," I said calmly. "How long do I have?" Marcus glanced at the legal woman, who whispered something in his ear. "The severance offer expires at the end of business today," he said. "But the termination is effective immediately. I'm going to have to ask you to surrender your company property now." I reached into my purse and removed my laptop, my security badge, and my parking pass. I placed them on the table with the same careful precision I'd used to write code, making sure everything was aligned and properly presented. "Is there anything else?" I asked. "That's everything," Marcus said, clearly relieved that I wasn't making a scene. "Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal items." I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked toward the door. Then I stopped and turned back. "Actually, there is one more thing," I said. "I'll be exercising my rights under Section 20B of our original merger agreement. My attorney will be in touch." The confused looks on their faces told me everything I needed to know. They'd forgotten about the clause entirely. I walked out of Epsilon Works for the last time at 5:47 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, carrying a small cardboard box containing a coffee mug, a desk plant, and a framed photo of my parents. The security guard who escorted me was apologetic and professional, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but following orders. As I reached my car in the parking garage, my phone buzzed with a text message from David. "Paperwork ready, just give me the word." I typed back, "Send it Monday morning, all of it." That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I slept for 12 hours straight, ate actual meals instead of grabbing granola bars between meetings, and took a long walk along the lakefront without checking my email every 5 minutes. On Sunday evening, I opened my laptop and began writing code again. Not for Epsilon Works, not for any client or deadline or corporate initiative. Just for me. The way I used to in my cramped Minneapolis apartment. It felt like coming home. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. Typical Chicago weather for early March. I was having coffee in my kitchen when David called to confirm that he'd sent the legal documents to Epsilon Works' corporate office. The package included 3 items: a formal notice invoking Section 22B of the merger agreement, a certified copy of my termination documentation proving that I'd been fired without specific cause, and a cashier's check made out to Epsilon Works LLC in the amount of exactly $1. At 9:23 a.m., I logged into the administrative backend of the HR flow system using credentials that Epsilon Works had never bothered to revoke. 3 years of their modifications and rebranding couldn't hide the fact that I still had root access to the core engine I'd built. I spent 47 minutes documenting every piece of original code, every algorithm, and every data structure that belonged to me under the terms of the repurchase clause. Then I sent a final command to the system, a simple script that would disable all core functionality while preserving the data integrity of employee records. At exactly 10:15 a.m., every computer running Epsilon HR Pro displayed the same message: Core system access terminated. Contact system administrator for assistance. The first phone call came at 10:31 a.m. It was Marcus, and he was screaming. "What the hell did you do to our system?" he shouted before I could even say hello. "I exercised my contractual rights," I replied calmly. "Did you receive the documentation from my attorney? This is corporate sabotage. We'll sue you for everything you're worth." "Actually, Marcus, if you read the contract you signed 3 years ago, you'll see that I now own the core system again. Epsilon HR Pro was built on top of my intellectual property, which I've just legally reclaimed." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he began to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. "You can't do this," he said, his voice smaller now, less certain. "We have clients. We have payroll to run. You're going to destroy people's livelihoods." "I'm not destroying anything," I said. "I'm simply taking back what was always mine. Your legal team is welcome to review the contract and confirm that everything I've done is completely within my rights." I hung up and turned off my phone. For the first time in 3 years, the silence was beautiful. The news broke 2 hours later on People Ops Journal, the industry publication that covered human resources technology. The headline read, "Founder repurchases HR system for $1 leaves former company in crisis." The article was brief but accurate. A spokesperson for Epsilon Works confirmed that they were experiencing temporary technical difficulties with their HR platform and were working diligently to restore full functionality. They declined to comment on the circumstances surrounding my departure or the system shutdown. By Wednesday, 3 of Epsilon Works' largest clients had terminated their contracts, citing unacceptable operational risk and concerns about system reliability. By Friday, Rebecca Sterling had resigned, and Marcus was facing questions from the board of directors about how he'd managed to lose control of the company's primary revenue source. The best part wasn't the chaos I'd caused at Epsilon Works. The best part was what happened next. Within a week of the system shutdown, I received calls from 4 former HR Flow clients who'd been forced to switch to Epsilon HR Pro when their original platform was discontinued. They wanted to know if I was planning to restart the service. By the end of the month, I'd incorporated a new company, coworker HR. The name reflected my original vision: human resources technology that was fundamentally kind, designed to empower employees rather than monitor and control them. I hired Jake Morrison as my chief technology officer. He'd quit Epsilon Works the day after the system shut down, telling Marcus exactly what he thought of a company that would fire the person who'd built their entire business model. Within 3 months, CoreKind HR had 12 clients and was processing payroll for over 800 employees. The system was faster, more intuitive, and more secure than anything I'd built before. Most importantly, it was mine again, free from corporate interference and profit-driven compromises. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I was building a thriving new business, Epsilon Works was still struggling to rebuild their HR platform from scratch. They'd hired a team of expensive consultants to reverse engineer the functionality they'd lost. But 3 years of modifications and customizations had made their codebase nearly impossible to untangle. 6 months after leaving Epsilon Works, I was invited to speak at the National HR Technology Conference in Las Vegas. The invitation came with a note from the conference organizer: "We'd love to hear your perspective on intellectual property protection and employee rights in the modern workplace." I accepted immediately. The presentation was scheduled for the main stage on the conference's final day, in front of an audience of over 2,000 HR professionals, technology vendors, and industry analysts. I'd been working on my slides for weeks, crafting a presentation that would be both educational and entertaining. But when I walked onto the stage that morning, I abandoned my prepared remarks entirely. The first slide contained just one sentence, displayed in large, bold letters against a black background: "Never underestimate the woman who wrote the contract." The audience was silent for a moment, processing the words. Then someone in the back started clapping. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet, applauding with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for rock concerts or championship games. I waited for the applause to die down, then began telling my story. I talked about the importance of reading contracts carefully, understanding your own value, and never letting anyone convince you that your contributions are less important than they actually are. I talked about the difference between building technology to empower people and building technology to control them. I talked about the responsibility that comes with creating systems that affect people's livelihoods and well-being. Most importantly, I talked about the power of preparation. The revenge I'd taken against Epsilon Works wasn't the result of anger or spite. It was the result of understanding my own worth, protecting my interests, and being ready to act when the time came. The presentation lasted 43 minutes. When I finished, the audience gave me another standing ovation, longer and more enthusiastic than the first. Later that day, as I was packing up my booth in the vendor hall, Marcus Brennan appeared beside my table. He looked older than I remembered, his expensive suit wrinkled and his confident demeanor replaced by something that looked almost like defeat. "Talia," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I respect what you did. I don't like it, but I respect it." I looked up from the marketing materials I was organizing. "Thank you, Marcus. That means more than you might think." "We underestimated you," he continued. "That was our mistake." "Yes," I agreed. "It was." He stood there for another moment, as if he wanted to say something else. Finally, he extended his hand. "Good luck with Core Kind. I mean that." I shook his hand, and he walked away. I never saw him again. Today, Core Kind. HR processes payroll for over 12,000 employees across 47 companies. We've never missed a payroll deadline, never had a security breach, and never implemented a feature designed to spy on or control workers. The system I built in my cramped Minneapolis apartment has grown into something bigger and more impactful than I ever imagined. But it's remained true to its original purpose, using technology to make work more human, not less. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how things ended with Epsilon Works. They want to know if I wish I'd handled things differently, been more diplomatic, found a way to work within their system. The answer is simple: I have no regrets. I built something valuable. They tried to steal it and diminish me in the process. And I took it back. In the end, the contract I signed protected me better than any corporate loyalty or workplace diplomacy ever could have. They called me just HR, a phrase meant to diminish and dismiss. They thought it made me small, forgettable, powerless. They were wrong about all of it.